So I'll start because we only have an hour and a half together, and we want to make sure we have enough time to hear from you and for your participation. So just as everybody's coming in, I'm welcoming back all of those of you who have joined us already for the first conversation 3 weeks ago around freedom of religion or belief and the Sustainable Development Goals. That's FORB, freedom of religion or belief, and the SDGs. And welcome for the first time if this is the first time that you're joining us as well. And we welcome you to this gathering. This is an important conversation around freedom of religion or belief and SDG 5, achieving gender equality. The context we are working in today remains the SDG pledge to leave no one behind. And before we begin, do write hello and where you're calling from in the chat. I know we're from all around the world, so that would be lovely if you wanted to. Monday was the International Day of the Girl Child. There are around 956 million girls in the world. That is a really powerful amount of potential. And I am sure that we all want to shape a world in which all girls are able to reach their full potential and thrive and not face discrimination or violence because of their gender and their religion or belief, but that they can be empowered because of and through it. Tomorrow is International Rural Women's Day. This year focuses on improving opportunities and equality of rural women in their communities and work, which is often agricultural, which is key to fighting poverty and hunger for everyone. When we look closely at those rural women, we can find they belong to certain religious or ethno-religious communities, the ones who are most affected by some of these issues. And so it is really important that freedom of religion or belief is a tool that we use to help understand all the dynamics going on for addressing any underlying systemic issues. These are issues for us all, men and women. With half the global population female, it is too much of a waste not to listen and learn from women and girls' experiences, needs, and creative solutions to the problems we all collectively face, including freedom of religion or belief issues. Women and religion are ancient topics of debate and discussion, and today it is also an intersection where people have often not felt heard and might fear the actions of others. Where this remains, we may be paralyzed in the actions and impact we can collectively make. And that is why it is so important that we have spaces such as today to come together and talk. I ask you to reflect now. What are you hoping to learn and take away today? Remember, we are all experts of our own contexts and experiences, and we all bring unique insights. All experiences matter. We are here to learn from each other in the areas where our experience or knowledge does not extend. This is a space for all. But just to give context, our format has been set up for parliamentarians and religious or belief leaders and influencers to better be empowered to move to work on these issues from theory and conversation into practice, both now and through informing the follow-up work the regional secretariats will do. These conversations will, for example, feed into the International Panel of Parliamentarians for FORB and others international gatherings in March 2022 and 2023, and we hope the UN high-level dialogue on the SDGs in summer 2022. And I know Dr. Shahid, the UN Special Rapporteur on FORB, is also listening in now somewhere on this screen. Parliamentarians and religious or belief leaders and influencers are really important for this work, being in positions to influence cultural, moral narratives and behaviour, and being able to bring forward stories and experiences from those whose voice has been overlooked. Please note today our advocacy statement. It was launched at the Global Act for SDGs week last month, and it should magically appear in the chat now. It is an important personal recognition, and you can sign in your own capacity to not overlook FORB in SDG related work and to seek and listen to religious or belief communities, experiences and needs to make sure that we really do leave no one behind. Before we move to conversations, the ones we will have together in our regional breakout rooms, we are joined by some of those thinking through and working on FORB and gender issues. Please do listen to what they share and what resonates for you, which you can then share in the breakout rooms. As we hear from our speakers, please do ask questions in the chat, which we will pick up on and collect to make sure are answered. No question is stupid, all questions help us learn. So I am delighted that we're joined now by Dr. Nazia Garner, who's very kindly joining us from Turkey on holiday, alongside being Associate Professor in International Human Rights Law at the University of Oxford and serving as a member of the OSCE panel of experts on FORB. She really has been pioneering in work on the intersections of FORB and gender, and I hope that this will inform our own reflections and thinking today. Naz, over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be, as you said, in the presence of so many experts. So my task is only to bring us together on some of the key issues whilst we start the debate. And just a small footnote that I'm no longer a member of the OSCE panel, but we do have panelists present, and I enjoyed my years on the panel. But back to the key topic, which is FORB, gender, and SDG 5. If we're here to talk to speak about gender equality and women's empowerment as captured in SDG 5, then why are we speaking of freedom of religion or belief? It's not stipulated there, so why are we bringing these different threads together? One response is that women should enjoy all human rights on the basis of equality. But Mariul's paper that I think you've all had access to in the past couple of weeks has also helpfully reminded us that freedom of religion or belief rights themselves are empowering rights. They're empowering rights in that they uphold women's rights to have, adopt, or change religion or belief, including leaving religion or belief or adopting another religion or belief, to manifest and practice religion or belief alone or in community with others, to not manifest and practice, to be free from coercion and discrimination in the field of religion or belief, and to raise children in conformity with their religion or belief. So it's very important before we get into the discussion to remind ourselves that FORB protect theistic, non-theistic, and atheistic beliefs, as well as the right not to profess any religion or belief. That's captured in General Comment 22, which interprets Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Also, it's captured quite neatly in a case by the European Court of Human Rights, the Kokkinakis case, that says that FORB offers a precious asset for atheists, agnostics, skeptics, and the unconcerned. So whether it is religion or belief, whether it's theistic, non-theistic, polytheistic, or atheistic, we are all in this together and are equal beneficiaries of FORB. So when we look at the development of the underlying human rights standards to the topic of today's discussion, we find that the mechanisms that uphold women's rights and gender rights on the one hand and freedom of religion or belief on the other, that these rights started on common ground before then developing along separate tracks. Why do I say that they started on common ground? The reason is because they both share a place, non-discrimination on the grounds of either sex or on grounds of religion or belief, share a place in Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in Article 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, in Article 2 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So everyone is entitled to all human rights and freedoms without any distinction of any kind, such as sex or religion. So they are together, they share a platform in human rights, recognizing that there should be no discrimination on grounds of sex or on grounds of religion or belief. Subsequently, though, they developed their own normative standards, and they develop along separate tracks. So for example, with FORB, we have Article 18 of the ICCPR, its interpretation, General Comment 22. We see that those standards, the jurisprudence is upheld by the UN Human Rights Committee. And then for women's rights, then at its core is CEDAW. But the firm common core objective that everyone should be entitled to all human rights and freedoms on the basis of equality and without suffering any discrimination deserves more of our attention. Unfortunately, this common ground has not drawn together the champions of women's rights or gender rights and freedom of religion or belief in the decades since 1948. We largely see that at the national, regional, and international levels, these champions have worked, separately and sometimes at loggerheads with one another. But recent years have seen a great growth, a significant growth in efforts to collaborate, to work together, and to see each other as allies whenever and wherever possible. And we see this at the international level, we see it in foreign affairs, we see it at the national level, we see it in the development field at the grassroots. Now let's draw some lessons from CEDAW. Article 2A of CEDAW recognizes, and Lopa, I'm so sorry, I hope I'm not treading on your toes here. In any case, Lopa will be able to develop this and articulate it much more beautifully than I. But CEDAW Article 2A recognizes that ending discrimination requires not only good laws, but also other appropriate means to practically realize the elimination of discrimination. That's true in the FORB field, it's true in terms of gender rights, and it's true in the intersection of gender rights and FORB. That the laws are, there are many bad laws in this field, let's be clear on that, but even if the laws were perfect, there are many other means that needs to be utilized to effectively, to give access to justice in these arenas. SDG 5 therefore benefits from reading both FORB and gender rights standards and mechanisms and laws and other appropriate means together in seeking to try and address them. Why bring them together? Because of language, audience, and champions. By coming together to advance both rights and benefit from each other's expertise and to develop that intersectional expertise and action points as well, we are able to bring together a wider range of champions with a wider range of skills base. We can bring together the language of human rights, of gender rights, and sometimes of religion or belief inspiration and standards. We reach a greater range of audiences when we collaborate. And I'm sure, I've just given 3 examples of why we benefit. I'm sure you will find many others. Let me just end by recalling also CEDAW's most challenging article, perhaps, and that's Article 5A. Article 5A of CEDAW says that to modify, one of the key objectives is to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and customary and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of the sexes, or on stereotyped roles for men and women. How for some 40 years we tried to achieve this whilst distancing ourselves from FORB actors and especially faith-based actors, I don't know. Because the states, even if the state were fully on board in seeking to change those customary practices, and often they're not, they hide behind religious practices and the majoritarian view of the role of men and women. But even if they were fully on board, without addressing and seeking inspiration from cultural practices that may wish to adapt to the goal of the equality of men and women and the role of men and women in wider society, why would we distance themselves from ourselves rather than seek to work with them to find solutions? So we're going to look at these in a lot more detail at the breakouts, but I hope those preliminary views might have been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Naz. Incredibly helpful. Yeah, really, really helpful just to have that outline from you and all your immediate wisdom. Delighted now as well to hand over to Lopa, who is the Executive Coordinator of the Generation Equality Forum and Director of the Civil Society Division at UN Women. And I know, Lopa, you're leading on UN Women's work on the Generation Equality Forum, the global multi-stakeholder partnership initiative launched to accelerate the achievement of gender equality commitments. A bit of context there, and thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so very much, Catherine. Once again, greetings to everybody on this call. Thank you to all of you who have participated in Generation Equality in Mexico and Paris, and who will be part of the global acceleration journey for gender equality over the next 5 years. Thank you to all of you who have come forward to make commitments, and we are really looking forward to doing this work together, and to this conversation on looking at synergies between FORB and gender equality, but beyond this conversation, taking the learnings from this conversation, taking the allyships that this conversation presents to accelerate the work forward. I am going to speak about UN Women's work on the intersections of FORB and SDG 5, and then the crucial importance of working with religious leaders, cultural leaders, and parliamentarians on this issue of FORB and gender equality going forward. I know we are on the clock, and we have more amazing experts who will lay the ground out before the discussions. So Catherine, if I overshoot time, please feel free to interrupt me, and I will wrap up. So let me start by saying, as Naz very clearly outlined, women's rights and freedom of religion and belief are indivisible and interrelated. There is no prioritizing one over the other, because religion and culture play a crucial role in the lives of women and girls, and how they see and live their lives all over the world. And therefore, women and girls must be able to practice freedom of religion and belief in their lives. Let me give an example. Women from the Muslim Uyghur community are allegedly subject to rape and forced sterilization in the so-called re-education camps, where hundreds of thousands of people are detained solely because of their religious affiliation. Religion and culture in different geographic contexts shape norms for gender equality. Let me give you an example here. In many countries, religiously justified family laws, for example, on marriage, divorce, custody of children, discriminate not only against women, but also against religious minorities, leaving women from religious minorities as double victims of discrimination. Religion and culture contribute to social debates, bringing different counter discourses and necessary counterpoints to existing discriminatory and unequal power majorities. And this is crucial as we look at a world with increasing migration and migrant populations across the world as societies integrate in different contexts. For example, in some countries, the ban on face veils disproportionately affects Muslim women's right to manifest their religion or belief. But in spite of this, as Naz identified, people working on FORB and people working on gender equality rarely work together, and because these are seen as in contradiction to each other. And that is because FORB is misunderstood or ill understood as a right that protects religion. And within that, conservative patriarchal religious beliefs, rather than as a right that protects individuals and people, not a religion. FORB is fundamentally about protecting individuals and groups' rights to have, practice, adopt a religion or belief, to manifest this in the best ways that they see fit in community and as individuals, and to be free from coercion and discrimination on the grounds of their religion. So, for example, This would cover women and girls in all their diversity, LGBTI people's right to interpret and practice their religion in the best ways that they believe is true. And the crucial task of the implementation of the human rights norms is to prevent the arbitrary privileging of certain perspectives on account of their traditional authority, their institutional or economic power or supremacy. And so to overcome this normative clash that is set up, we must be able to bring and embrace the diverse concerns of women and girls across the cultural, political, and geographic perspectives and spectrum, and bring their perspectives into greater visibility, both nationally and internationally. And the platform and the opportunities that the SDGs, the CEDAW reporting, and the Beijing Platform for Action provide for this in the intergovernmental space is absolutely crucial. Let me get to what actually happens in this intergovernmental space. The evocation continuously by state parties and some civil society organizations of using religion and culture to push back on human rights, justifying their positions of conservative beliefs and of pushing back on gender equality norms and standards, using the sanctity of religion or the sanctity of the heteronormative family unit. And so this normative kind of counterposition is what is crucial to be that we need to contend within this intergovernmental space. And this is happening in the context of a world still reeling from COVID, which has exacerbated existing inequalities in the common lives of women and girls, including in their political participation, domestic violence, unpaid care responsibilities. Rates of child marriage have gone up. Millions of women have been plunged into extreme poverty as they have lost their jobs. And we have seen religion working to erode democracy in country after country after country. Let me give some context at this point in time at this point in time, in September 2021, only 26 women serve as heads of state or government in only 24 countries. 21% of government ministers were women, with only 14 countries having achieved 50% or more women in cabinets. At the current rate, women will not achieve gender equality in the highest positions of power for another 130 years. And so UN Women is expanding its work with activists and movements who do their activism through religion and culture, acknowledging their vital role in changing norms and culture. And this strategy will include feminists of faith based in institutional and organizational spaces, as well as religious and cultural leaders who work for gender equality, because strengthening partnerships with faith-based organizations and leaders is going to be crucial in the context of shrinking space, humanitarian and conflict contexts. This includes meaningfully engaging in political dialogues. This is one of the most important aspects. Political dialogues with political and religious leaders for the creation and amendment of laws that provide an enabling environment for the realization of gender equality. Let me give some examples over here. Why is this so absolutely central?
Hi, apologies. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'm just going to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lopa. Apologies.
Not at all. I'm just going to wrap up. I just want to say that unless under the law, one of the most important focuses for working on this interrelationship between form and gender equality is looking at the environment of law. Because under the law, women cannot inherit in over 39 countries. They cannot apply for passports, they cannot be heads of families, they cannot travel outside their homes, and so on and so forth. Their very identity and life in community is threatened under the law. And therefore, this work with parliamentarians and religious leaders in transforming law is absolutely central. Finally, in concluding it, going forward, what we need to be looking at is clarifying the normative clash for what form is and how it intersects with gender. Number two, using the framework of CEDAW, Beijing platform, and the SDGs to support and strengthen form in its work with parliamentarians and religious leaders to create an enabling environment in law and practice. And finally, for generation equality and the action coalitions over the next 5 years, the focus is on accelerating those commitments and on movement building with multiple actors in public life and in community life, so as to be able to create this enabling environment. Apologies for taking more time than I should have. And back to you, Catherine.
Not at all, Opa. We needed to hear all of that. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for telling us where to focus and the importance of facing where these perceived clashes are, not hiding from it and having these spaces for conversation. It will be difficult, but it's really, really important that we can move through that together. Really delighted as well that we have the Reverend Bafana Kumalo with us, who is the co-founder and senior strategic advisor for Sonke Gender Justice in South Africa. He's been doing incredibly important work around transforming norms around male and female gender roles. Over to you, Bafana.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thanks to the two previous speakers who have really mapped out the issues quite eloquently. I was asked to speak mainly about male involvement and how we could enhance that to advance the cause for freedom of religion, particularly in reference to gender equality. I wanted to start by acknowledging that religion is a very important institution in many of our societies globally. In Africa, where I am from, it's probably, the second highest influential institution next to the politics. And majority of the people still take religious leaders very, very, very seriously. But I wanted to problematize what I consider for myself the quintessential point, and that is the deity or God, whatever language people use, is often defined in the form of maleness, which for me is part of the problem. So we need to, if you like, to liberate religion from patriarchal shackles, because that's where most of these problems emanate from. When people begin to see God in the form of male, they then think they have the privilege, therefore, to control anyone else who is not male. And it becomes very difficult, therefore, for women, for instance, to express themselves, to be acknowledged, to have their talents, celebrated within the religious forums, because of this notion that they are lesser than because they are not male. And in this respect, therefore, I find it very interesting that in many of the conversations around women's development, including about women's health, you find a group of men sitting around the table within religious circles, making policies, making decisions, making pronouncements, which all, in essence, control women's bodies. So what we need really, because the strange thing for us, at least in my region, is that majority of the people that are in the religious formations are women. It is women who are adherents of these religious faiths. It is women who are supporting the religious communities. It is women who are even providing resources to maintain religious institutions. And yet, where decisions have to be made, women are conspicuous by their absence. So in order to alter this, I think we must get back to the basics so that we see God as God. And the importance of religion is about how does religion contribute to the well-being of all human beings? Because religion, after all, is about well-being. It's about ensuring that there is proper management of life and enhancing of relations in a manner that God would like to see the world operating. So we need to redirect our efforts at ensuring that religion, in essence, is open to all as a given, that it acknowledges all, that no one is left behind, and therefore everyone should be treated with dignity. But in doing this, we need to ensure that we work with these powerful men who sit in these structures and make these decisions so that we change the narrative. And I think it is possible. From the work that we do in Africa through Men Engage Africa, we are able now, through the work we are doing with religious leaders, to get them to support the SDGs, for instance, to support campaigns against harmful practices, FGM and child marriages. And there's a lot of examples that I can share later with you. I think it's a as one of my colleagues, Father Langeveld, who's late now, who was a Catholic priest, used to say, the religion is a site of struggle. We need to ensure that the struggles of the people are also included within the religious formations so that religion also responds to what people need. And that includes women and people who have different sexual orientations. These issues by raising the debate to our understanding of deity and God and how God relates to human beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Bafana, for that really powerful presentation. There's so much wisdom that you hold from all you've been doing. Really exciting that you're part of the conversation later too. And just before we do go into conversations, we have our last speaker, Annika Jane Dorothy. Thrilled that she's here. She is director of the Green Congress of Kenya and the youngest elected member of the steering board of Political Parties Liaison Committee. And I know she's advocating for intergenerational co-leadership of young women in political spaces, and she can share from her own experiences now. Annika.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, I just would like to thank the three previous speakers for their perspective, which is quite insightful. And just to add a few comments to that, I think that religious leaders in Africa are pertinent stakeholders in politics, especially in policy and in election processes. Having an audience of more than 3/4 of some of our countries, they instill belief processes and opinions. And in many instances, centers of worship have been used as mobilization centers, vaccine centers, etc. And they have provided opinions of matters of national security and interest, and they have been used to mediate peace in areas of war and in countries that are on the brink of war. You know, like, for example, my country after the post-election violence in 2007. They have submitted opinions on proposed constitutions and provided platforms for campaigns for aspiring politicians. Because the majority of the population in the global south believes so much in religion, the church and other religious bodies are pertinent stakeholders in all sectors of implementation. It is rare to have a commission or a task force formed without the representation of religious leaders. It is therefore of utmost importance that various stakeholders are represented on this call, recognize the role of religious leaders as pertinent stakeholders. And I believe, this is why we are here today, but we must also unpack the role of supporting women's leadership by religious leaders and contributing to good governance. The church, for example, teaches submission, sometimes which contradicts the notions of women's leadership. And you may ask that, like now we have women's bishop and how that comes to be. And we have Ruth and other prominent women in the Bible who led their people, but this leaves an undiscussed issue in the contradictions and systems of belief of religion. And we have a lot of people questioning how to accept the perception of women's leadership when they have been taught from a young age that this contradicts their belief system. Online, since the Taliban came into power, for example, we have seen Muslim scholars rebuke the Taliban rule by saying that Islam was not created to exploit women, that Khadija bint al-Khuwailid, the first wife of Prophet Muhammad, was a powerful, inspiring figure who was referred to as the mother of believers, praised as a great tradesperson for almost single-handedly funding and supporting the Prophet and Islam. You know, just as the previous speaker had said, women contribute largely in supporting and funding religious organizations. But with different beliefs on women as religious leaders and political leaders, a key question today here is, can the modern African woman be true to herself and her beliefs while being both religious and a political leader? Do religious spaces have set identities for women's leadership? And the voters who are also members of these religious spaces need help. And some of the questions that they're asking are, for example, are, what does religion say about women? What is the place of young women in leadership with religion as a key factor, right? In many instances, the scriptures have depicted women leaders of grace and wisdom. And I think it's high time that we highlight women as essential to the success of belief systems and gospels, such as to justify to the masses the appeal for women's leadership. You know, elections and leadership is important to be anchored in legitimacy. That legitimacy is the difference between accepting a general election outcome and not accepting it, the perception. And so the main issue in women's leadership is leveling up their identities against a set public opinion and society's understanding of what their roles should be. Women and men need guidance in understanding the value of women's leadership, and scholars have done their part. So we know that religious leaders have a great influence on today's politicians and elections, and in creating a candidate's legitimacy. We, the people, need the church and other religious institutions to hold political leaders to account on matters of national interest, including endorsing women's leadership as a path to increased economic prosperity. Some of our current systems have proved not to work for gender equality and economic justice, and it's time for religious organizations to take up leadership in the courts of public opinion and demand some accountability in a united front for women's leadership and influence the narrative, because E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika. I can see that there are some really clear thinking and themes that are coming out. There's clearly collective wisdom between all those who have spoken. And it's now time for you to add your voices. So with deep thanks to Nazia, Lopa, Bafana, and Annika, thank you so much for your voices.